Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Yathagner Dahika Shakti Ramakrishne Sthita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Sharadam Pranamamyaham. We offer our salutations to Sri Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother, the embodiment of all knowledge, who is established in Sri Ramakrishna like the burning power which is one with the fire itself. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning I'm going to speak on Holy Mother, and the particular topic within the field of Holy Mother, her life and message and teachings is Holy Mother relevant to modern women? The question, is Holy Mother relevant to modern women? And I'm sure all of you will be extraordinarily surprised to know that my answer is yes, but first I have to get to that answer. So we will address the question of whether she is relevant to modern women this morning. And the reason for choosing this talk is that originally we had planned to celebrate Holy Mother's birth on her solar calendar anniversary, that is December 22nd. She was born in 1853 on December 22nd, right at the winter solstice. In fact, the birth of Jesus was originally at near the winter solstice, because that was a celebration in the Roman Empire. No one knows when Jesus was born, but it was we don't even know for sure the year that he was born. What to speak of the month or the day? That is not recorded anywhere, not even suggested anywhere. But December 25th was chosen because it was a Roman celebration of the beginning of the northern path of the sun, when the sun begins its northern path. And for the northern hemisphere, the days go from their shortest towards their longest. So when the sun is growing, when the days are growing. And so it was deeply symbolic. That was a time when the light is coming back into the world. And so with the birth of Christ, there was thought that that was the most appropriate time to celebrate his birth. So just as in many other areas, the Christian church, as it developed in the centuries soon after the birth of Christ, it adopted many customs, Roman traditions, and then as it spread further north into Europe, it adopted further customs of the Northern European people. It was a way, and then even when it came to the Americas, it adapted in Mexico and other Latin countries to the celebrations of the indigenous people. In North America, not so much, but in Mexico, Central America, and South America, yes, very much so. It was a process of taking customs of the local people, pre-Christian people, and using that impulse of the people to celebrate at certain times to redirect it towards Christ. And so Christ was born it was believed, it became believed, it was first just arbitrarily established for the reasons I gave, and then it came to be believed that he was born at the December 25th. So with Holy Mother, I've always thought that it was highly appropriate that she was born right at the winter solstice, for the same reason as with Jesus. But in her case, it actually happened. However, we've moved Holy Mother celebration to January 1st because December 22nd is a Tuesday and not many people could join us even online for the celebration. Only those who are retired and don't have to go to work and don't have doctor's appointments. So we've moved it to January 1st. And plan to continue celebrating year after year her birth on January 1st, so that it's predictable and so that it is on a holiday. Uh, so, is Holy Mother an ideal for modern women? That's basically the question that I want to address today. Now, when Swami Vivekananda was asked about the ideal of women, or what the future of women would be, what would be the future of women, Swami Vivekananda drew himself back and said, "What? Am I a woman that I should decide their future? Hands off. Women will decide their own future." And so, yes, that is the best answer about the future of women. Hands off, let women decide their own future. That's not to be decided, especially not to be decided by men, nor to be decided by committee. Um, uh, Much of the harm that has been done to the world has been, let me rephrase that, much of the harm that religion has done to the world has come from religion dictating where it didn't need to dictate. And so in this instance also, both religion and society should have a hands-off approach and let women decide their future. However, it's reasonable to look at trends and look at possibilities and to see what might influence the future. So that's where we are going today. So today we're raising the question about Holy Mother's relevance to the future of women. So let me give you three quotations, one from Swami Vivekananda, one from Swami Shivananda, another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, and then one from Sister Nivedita, Swami Vivekananda's Irish-English disciple. So Swamiji himself says, "People will not understand her now." That is, people will not understand the Holy Mother, Sarada Devi, now, but they will gradually. There will be no salvation for the world without the divine power. So here he's referring to shakti, that is, the divine power, the creative power of the divine. That the ultimate reality is conceived of in its static aspect and in its dynamic aspect. And the dynamic aspect is called shakti, which means power or energy. And that is conceived of as feminine, as the Divine Mother. It's interesting that in Buddhism, they took just the opposite view. In Buddhism, as in Hinduism, when the Tantric movement swept through Buddhism as it did through Hinduism and eventually through Jainism and the Sikhs as well, later, much later, the Hindus regarded the divine power as Shakti, and that you can see the roots of that in the Upanishads and even earlier in the Vedas. But they regarded Shakti as feminine, and the transcendent absolute as Shiva, the male deity, who is forgetful of the world, and the Divine Mother, the one who brings forth creation. In Buddhism, they were never concerned with creation. They didn't even inquire into creation or what brought it about or anything like that. That was not in a part of Buddhist thinking, really. And so the Buddhists, they conceived of the static aspect of what they call wisdom, the static aspect of reality, as feminine, and the dynamic aspect of compassion as masculine. That seems like a strange identification to me. And from a Hindu standpoint also, it seems strange that the feminine was static and passive and in the background, and then the compassionate, loving aspect of wisdom was the dynamic aspect was considered to be male. So whatever, in the Hindu tradition, Shakti is female. And so let me come back to Swamiji. I'll start again from the beginning. But where he speaks of divine power, he's speaking of Shakti, which is conceived of as the Divine Mother. People will not understand her, Holy Mother, now, but they will gradually. There will be no salvation of the world without the divine power. Mother, Holy Mother, has been born to revive this wonderful Shakti. Without the grace of Shakti, nothing can be accomplished. What do I find in America and Europe? The worship of Shakti, the worship of power. Yet they worship her ignorantly through sense gratification. Imagine then what a lot of good they will achieve when they worship her with purity, looking upon her as mother. So this is a very interesting statement. There's a lot here. I won't go into meaning or the significance of everything he says, but let me say here where he says that what do I find in America and Europe? The worship of Shakti. That is, he found here the worship of dynamism, the worship of the creative power that had been awakened through the Renaissance, the rediscovery in the Western world of the Greek and Roman classics, which had been lost during the so-called Dark Ages of Europe. They were rediscovered through the Muslim world. The Muslims had discovered these texts when they conquered the Byzantine Empire. And the Muslim civilization during its golden period, it was a civilization which absorbed from wherever it could. And so it absorbed the learning of the Greeks and Romans and had their golden period of the development of thought and civilization. But it was through them and the Crusades where the Christian civilization came in contact aggressively with the Muslim civilization. The two were battling each other. But there was also the exchange of thought. And so Europe rediscovered the classics of Greece and Rome. And through that, there was an awakening of the mind. And included in that awakening of the mind was a curiosity about this world. Before that rediscovery in the Renaissance, which created the Renaissance, there had been a forgetfulness of this world. With the collapse of the Roman civilization, the new Christian civilization, which was just in its beginnings in Europe, looked upward and inward. It lost interest in this world. But with the Renaissance, they began to take interest in this again. And so there was this dynamic civilization which grew and which eventually through colonialism spread around the world and influenced the whole, even the far corners, far reaches of the world. With this dynamic interest in the world and what it is and how by the study of the world and everything within it, we learn about it and thus we gain power over it. And so that is the worship of Shakti, which Swamiji is talking about. The interest in the created world, this world which is the product of Shakti. But as he says, that they are worshiping Shakti for sense gratification. That is, the main aim is to improve life here on earth so that we can enjoy more and more. So he says that yet they worship her, the divine Shakti, this creative power. They worship her ignorantly through sense gratification. Imagine then what a lot of good they will achieve when they worship her with purity, looking on her as their mother. And so there's another aspect to this worship of Shakti in the West. The more generalized aspect is this fascination coming from the Renaissance, the reawakening of the Western mind, this fascination with the world, with the created world, and how to manipulate it, the development of technology, science, and then science leading into technology. And so that was one aspect of it. Another aspect, I think, that he is hinting at here is the Western fascination just with woman. It was also at the time of the Renaissance that romantic love, it was actually just at the beginning or just before the beginning of the Renaissance, really, in the 13th century, when suddenly there was this awakening to the fascination of romantic love. Not that that hadn't been there since the beginning, but it developed in a new way. It was the beginning of what we know as chivalry. That is the idealization of a woman as an object of romantic love, so much so that people would devote themselves to their queen if they had a queen in their country. This was before the days of nation states, but a king or a queen would rule over a kingdom, however large it went, and it expand and contract through continual battles. So a person would dedicate themselves to the queen. They had no hope of marrying a queen. They were just commoners. But it was this ideal of the ideal woman, the unreachable woman. And so that led to the development of chivalry and the development of romantic love, where the ideal was romantic love. Just as in India, there is still common for there to be arranged marriages. So in the rest of the world, also including the Western world, it was all marriages were often arranged. But now came the ideal of romantic love. I'm going to fall in love with somebody. Marriage is not just a practical idea; it becomes an ideal of love. And so that also Swamiji is talking about here, I think, when he talks about, yet they worship her ignorantly through sense gratification. That is the idea of romantic love joined with the idea of the engagement with creation. Imagine then what a lot of good they will achieve when they worship her with purity, looking on her as their mother. So that's part of a letter that Swami Vivekananda wrote. The whole letter is beautiful and worth study and meditation. But let me move on to something that Swami Shivananda said, Mahapurush Maharaj. He says, primordial energy incarnated herself as mother, that is, as Sarada Devi, Holy Mother, in order to awaken the women of the world. That is, he says that was the purpose of Holy Mother's birth, to awaken the women of the world. Her advent was followed by an unprecedented awakening of the women of the world. Now that's very interesting, that her advent was followed by an awakening of the women of the world. He attributes that to the coming of Holy Mother. They are now resolved, they women are now resolved to build up their lives in all round gracefulness and to advance in all directions. Not much has been achieved yet. When he was speaking, probably this was the 1920s, I believe. For this is just the beginning. There is remarkable activation among women in the spheres of spiritual pursuits, politics, science, the arts, literature, etc. And more is to come. This is the play of the divine power, the mysterious significance of which is beyond the conception of ordinary mortals. So here he is attributing a cosmic function to the Holy Mother, or certainly a worldwide social function to the birth of the Holy Mother. As to help us understand that, we can refer to Swami Vivekananda's beautiful lecture, Christ the Messenger, given in Southern California in 1900, the beginning of 1900, where he says that from age to age, there is a huge wave of a social movement. And on top of the wave is the personality, which embodies the wave. And he's talking about Jesus being there being a huge wave of spirituality, and the prophet on the top of the wave, who is the embodiment of that wave. But the wave is bigger even than the prophet. It's a movement which rushes through society and brings about historical change. But the prophet is the embodiment of that. The prophet is part of that phenomenon, the embodiment, the figurehead, the face of that dynamic movement through society. And so again, he was talking of Jesus, but he certainly was thinking, we can tell from everything he said, he was thinking also of Sri Ramakrishna and certainly of the Holy Mother. That wave that he saw coming with Sri Ramakrishna, he was similar to the wave which had come at the time of Christ, which had come earlier at the time of the Buddha. And who knows in the distant past how many such waves came through what we consider primitive or prehistoric society. So again, this is the the play of the divine power, that is the divine mother, the shakti, the mysterious significance of which is beyond the conception of ordinary mortals. That we can see the signs once they're pointed out, or we see the signs anyway, but we don't know what to attribute it to. The awakening of women all over the world, the struggle in the West for the rights to vote, the struggle to get equality, to come out from under the control of a patriarchal society around the world. So then we come to Sister Nivedita, who had many beautiful things to say about Holy Mother. And so just a short passage from her says, "Our Holy Mother, as we call her," so this was from a letter that she was writing, I forget to whom she was writing it, but to someone in the West. "Our Holy Mother, as we call her, is only a simple Hindu woman." So you see, she's explaining who Holy Mother is. "Our Holy Mother, as we call her, is only a simple Hindu woman, and yet, as I think, the greatest woman in the world today. She is so girlish and young, full of life and brightness. She is always the same. Oh, what a comfort. The one person who never changes. Ideal Hindu, ideal disciple, ideal woman of all place and time." So an extraordinary statement, the ideal woman of all place and time. So she says that our mother, our Holy Mother, is just a simple Hindu woman. It's just, and yes, that she was. She was so simple in her life. That's why at first when people read her life, it's not as interesting seeming as the life of Sri Ramakrishna, who was going into ecstasy and having all kinds of visions which are described, and extraordinary tapasyas, spiritual practices that he went through, and the teachers that he met. It's a very dynamic life. If the right filmmaker ever got hold of it, and the right one hasn't yet. There have been several attempts, and some of them okay, but none of them even close to doing justice. But if the right filmmaker ever got hold of Sri Ramakrishna's life and took interest in it, sympathetic interest, then it has tremendous dramatic possibilities, because it was a very dramatic life. And yet Holy Mother's life was extraordinarily simple. Either Sri Ramakrishna or Swamiji, or both of them, their lives are very dramatic. But Holy Mother's life outwardly was very simple. So after reading Sri Ramakrishna's life, if you come to Holy Mother's life, it's nice, it's calming, but where is the drama? But then you realize that drama is not everything in life. The quiet, tremendous power in Holy Mother's life is silent, tranquil, and yet that tremendous potential power, unprecedented power she had. So all of these, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Shivananda, Sister Nivedita, they all speak of Holy Mother's historical significance, as though she were initiating a tremendous social movement, and that she had a tremendous effect over society. But still the question remains, was she relevant to modern women? And so let me begin by giving the reasons why she doesn't seem relevant to modern women. For one thing, she came out of old India. In Holy Mother's life, I was just reading yesterday about how when she was in Madras, that was the first time they had seen electric lights in a city. Calcutta was not yet electrified, and they saw electric lights, street lights and things working by electric power in Madras for the first time. It was long after the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna, when she was relatively late in her life, when she got in an automobile for the first time. And so she came from old India. Even when I went to her home village of Jairambati back in the 1970s and 80s, you could still ride in a bullock cart, as she did. That was her main means of transportation, was riding in a bullock cart, or in Calcutta in a horse carriage, or in a palanquin, that is, carried by bearers. a box with a chair in it carried by bearers. So she came from the old India, where the old India was still the main India. Most of India was still the old India, and new India was just showing up at the edges. Places like Calcutta, among the upper classes of Calcutta, the educated classes of Calcutta, that was where the new India was beginning to show. But she came very much from the old India, and she led an extraordinarily sheltered life, a hidden life, really. The direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna never saw Holy Mother's face. Swami Vivekananda never saw Holy Mother's face. Whenever one of the great disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, monastic disciples, would come to her, she would cover herself from head to foot. Only her, the fore part of her feet would be showing out of the cloth. They never saw anything but this form wrapped in cloth from head to ankle at least. And so her life was very sheltered. She lived at Dakshineshwar, serving Sri Ramakrishna for so many years, and yet the uh, people who worked at the Dakshineshwar temple, when asked about her, they said, we've heard that she lives here, but we've never seen her. So an extraordinarily sheltered life. So again, what does that have to do with modern women? She was, in her behavior, was extremely modest, led a very hidden life, besides the fact that she wasn't seen much. Uh, a few people even heard her voice, aside from her women companions. She would whisper to, even when Swami Vivekananda would come, whom she looked on as her own son. Yet to talk to him, she would whisper to an attendant, and the attendant would tell Swamiji what she had said. So she wouldn't even speak directly to Swami Vivekananda or to the other monastic disciples, with a couple of exceptions. Swami Advaitananda, Buro Gopal or Elder Gopal, and Latu Maharaj, Swami Adbhutananda, because they helped her with kitchen things and shopping and other things. She was more free with them. But otherwise, extremely modest, extremely hidden life. She never traveled outside of India. She did travel within India, even more than Sri Ramakrishna had traveled. Sri Ramakrishna traveled some in North India, but Holy Mother went even further afield, but still within India, and within what is present day the nation state of India. Greater India included Bangladesh, Pakistan, but her travels were within what we nowadays recognize as the nation state of India, across North India and down to Madras and over to Bangalore. And she worshiped her husband as God. That's certainly not a modern aspiration of, of liberated women. She looked on her husband as God. And you may say that, well, that's easy for someone if she had a husband like Sri Ramakrishna, but that was part of her culture. And of course, yes, she recognized that Sri Ramakrishna was God and not an ordinary jiva. So her relationship with him was indeed special, but still it was part of the culture she grew up in as well. And then she was a lifelong celibate. She practiced the strictest form of celibacy all of her life. Never had any marital relations with her husband at all. And then she had the ideal of being the mother to all. That also, that's of course not contrary to feminism, but it is out of sync with the aspirations of many who want to get free from the trammels, as they see it, of motherhood, and to be looked on as just a person, not as a mother, but just as a full person, independent of motherhood and all of that. In fact, I was shocked once in Hollywood when I was talking to someone, and there was one of the nuns, and she's no longer there, but there was one of the nuns in Hollywood present listening to the conversation. And I mentioned the Holy Mother, and so this nun said, well, you know, she does have a name, meaning she's Sri Sarada Devi. Why do you call her Holy Mother as if that's all she is? I was shocked, because Holy Mother had the idea that she was mother to everyone. That was her identity. And so again, that's out of tune with some. And her life was a mixture of the mythic and the historical, as were the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. You find that her life, at all of the edges of her life blends into myth, living myth, not false myth, living myth. But the stories of her birth, the stories of her conception, the stories of when she was a young girl and would come to Kamarpukur to spend some time with her husband's family, Ramakrishna's family in Kamarpukur, and she didn't know how to cross the road to go to the pond to take her bath because she was a shy, young, married woman. She didn't know how to go out by herself. And so she would go out of the house and be afraid to go forward. And then 8 young women, 4 in front and 4 behind, would come. And the first time she met them, they said, "Come, do you want to take a bath? We're going to take our bath. Come with us." And so she went in the middle between the 4 in front and 4 behind. And they, every day that she was there, they would come and take her to bathe. No one knew who they were, where they came from. No one had heard of these people. But there's a tradition that the Divine Mother has 8 female attendants. And so it's believed that these were the 8 female attendants of the Divine Mother, the goddess, who came manifested in order to take her bath so that she could do so in tranquility and without fear. So she didn't... we say that she was Sarva Vidya Swarupa, or Swarupini or Swarupa. So she who is the embodiment of all wisdom. And yet she didn't know English. I doubt that, I've never seen any evidence that she knew Hindi. Sri Ramakrishna knew Hindi, but I don't think Holy Mother would have had the opportunity to learn pick up Hindi. So she knew Bengali, she didn't know Sanskrit, she didn't know English. She barely knew how to read and write. And that she did because of her own initiative. She was denied the right to learn to read and write, being a girl. But of her own initiative, she managed to learn some. But by the end of her life, she had used it so little that she couldn't even sign her own name. She was practically unlettered. She hadn't, again, traveled outside of India. And yet we say that she was the embodiment of all wisdom. She would even praise one of her disciples, an attendant disciple, who knew how to wind up the clock in the household. The simple task of taking a key, old-timey clock, where you had to turn a key to wind up the clock. You wind up the spring, and the spring action would keep the clock running until the spring had exhausted its wound-up energy, and then you had to wind it up again. So Holy Mother would say that this disciple was so clever, he knows how to wind up a clock. And yet we call her the embodiment of all wisdom. So in all of these ways, it seems like she would not be that relevant to modern women. And then in order to appreciate her, to have the capacity to appreciate who she was, we first of all have to appreciate the purity which she manifested to an extraordinary degree. The purity she manifested like rarely seen. She used to pray to the moon when she was in Dakshineshwar with Sri Ramakrishna. She would pray that, or she'd pray to God and say, "Oh, Lord, even the moon has spots, but make my character spotless." And indeed, her character was spotless. The extraordinary purity that she had, that was one of the foremost characteristics. So again, is she relevant to modern women? That's one of the first things we need in order to appreciate who she was, is the appreciation for her purity. We don't need to have it. We have to appreciate the fact that she did have it, that that's who she was. We have to be able to appreciate her simplicity. Again, the simplicity that thought her disciple was so bright because he knew how to wind up a clock. What would she have done in the modern age with cell phones and computers and all of that? So she lived a life of utter simplicity, and she was utterly simple herself. Not in the bad sense of simple-minded, but a life of utter simplicity. Again, there was no drama in her life. There was no excitement in her life, just a routine life of simple household routine and tradition. And then we have to appreciate her. We have to be able to appreciate the modesty which she manifested, because she led an utterly modest life. And we have to appreciate her extraordinary endurance and patience. Extraordinary endurance and patience. So that I'll come back to in a little bit. And most of all, we have to be able to appreciate the love and universal compassion which she manifested. That, of course, is easier because everyone wants to love and everyone appreciates real compassion when they see it, selfless compassion when they see it. But again, her purity, her simplicity, her modesty, her extraordinary endurance and patience, these things also, to understand her life and to appreciate her life, we have to develop an appreciation for these things. And what does that have to do with the aspirations of modern women? So coming to what the aspirations of modern women are, some of them, of course I can't deal with all of them, but one of the things, of course, is freedom, is the freedom, that there should be no glass ceilings anywhere. Women should be able to do that which men can do. Women should have the opportunities that men have. There shouldn't be all of these glass ceilings which society has constructed to keep women down, to keep women in their place, to keep women in their household. There was that extraordinary statement of Larry Summers, who became well known when he was President Obama's economic advisor, at least in his first administration. I don't think he lasted into the second. But before he became Obama's economic advisor, he was president of Harvard University for a short time, though his field was economics. And he made the extraordinary and highly inflammatory statement that women are just not good at math and science, and that's why you don't find many of them in math and the sciences. So he meant that structurally or naturally they're not good at math and the sciences. And so that, of course, immediately inflamed opinion against him, as it should have. As it should have. It was a stupid statement. I have many, many times told young Indian girls, whether they're children of Indian immigrants here or whether they're young Indian girls in India, that you have a great lesson to teach Western women and men both. Because every one of you that I ask, what is your favorite subject in school? 95% of you say, my favorite subject is math and science. So even now in my country, people think that that math and science is not such a good field for women. They're not naturally good at it. But you are naturally good at it, and you love it, and you show that women can be as good in math and the sciences as any man can be. And uh, uh, anyway, coming back to the topic, the aspiration of women, part of it is freedom. That is the freedom to move in society without being looked on as a sexual object, without being harassed, and without confronting barriers at every point that they go. They seek equality and parity. That is, parity in pay. If I do the same work as a man does, I should be paid the way that a man does. Even now in America, fortunately in many countries it's not the case anymore, but even now in America, we can't pass the Equal Pay Amendment, where women are guaranteed the same pay for the same work as men. Even now, we can't do that here. And so equality of treatment, equality of opportunity, and parity in pay. They seek freedom from a separate standard. Even now, when a woman runs for public office in America, she's judged by what clothes she chooses to wear. Whoever comments on the clothes a male politician is wearing, unless they're wearing something outlandish, but nobody ever comments, well, why did he wear that suit? Or that color doesn't go well with him. Or look at that tie. Why does he wear a red tie instead of a blue tie or whatever? Nobody ever says things like that about him. They ignore what a male politician is wearing. But a female politician can't come out into public without having her appearance commented on, as if it's only a woman's appearance that's important, which also means that a woman's appearance as it appeals to men. And so the judgment of women politicians and women in so many fields is different from the way men are judged. And of course, women seek an end to the patriarchy, where it's just assumed that men are in charge of everything and women are to look pretty. Now, yes, we've come a long way from that, but the roots of it are still there. And so, these are some of a few of the aspirations of modern women. So, coming to the women's movement, admittedly, there are excesses in the women's movement that I certainly will admit, and many people see. Some people, of course, will deny that there are any excesses, but there's, on the part of many, there's an absence of patience and endurance. But why? Why is where do the excesses we see in the feminist movement come from? What we may see as an excess militancy, a lack of patience and endurance, a generalized anger and so forth, and a flaunting of their femininity in the face of society. Where do these, what may be considered excesses, where do they come from? There's a good parallel. At the time of the civil rights movement, when the Black Americans, African Americans, were seeking equality, many people told them, just be patient, things will change, don't rock the boat, don't rock the boat. Just be patient, things are changing and things will get better. Their answer was, we've been waiting for things to get better for 400 years since we were first brought here. We're not waiting anymore. How many more centuries are we going to wait? We want equality and we want it now. And they were right to do that. They were right to do that. Those who cautioned them that don't rock the boat, history has proven them wrong. And so they were told, you just be submissive, just be quiet, and things will change of their own. Well, they hadn't changed. And so with women, a point has come where women have been held down so long, even after they began to become conscious of the fact, more conscious of the fact of what society, the situation society had put them in for so long. And so now is not the time for patience. And so, yes, you see aggression, you see anger and all of that, but why? There's a good reason for it. There's a good reason for it. And what about the flaunting of their femininity and so forth that many people might complain about? If a person has been held down for a long time, the first thing they want to do is to express themselves and to get rid of all of the trammels that they have had put on them, the chains that they have put on them. They want to act out. And so that has a reason also. So instead of telling them to be patient, society should be patient. So what the place that women have been put in for thousands of years, they're coming out of it, and of course they're going to stretch their arms and their legs and dance in their newfound freedom. That's okay. We have to have patience. Once they have attained to full equality and full parity and full respect as women, not as women acting like men, but just as women. Recognize that women as women are equal. Once that is fully accepted, it's just an assumption in society, then there won't be the need for acting out. But that comes. You see it. You saw it in the civil rights movement sometimes, though there was remarkably little of it, considering what they had suffered, but a little bit. You see it in the gay rights movement. You see it in the feminist movement. That's natural. That's natural because people have been suppressed for so long that when the suppression is taken off, it's like the jack in the box. You open the top of the jack in the box, it springs out because it's been suppressed. We in the West are too focused on short time segments. We speak of the 2000 teens, or well, it's easier to talk in terms of the 1980s or 1960s or 1970s rather than the 20s, which we're just entering, or the teens, or the aughts in the 21st century. So we speak of the 1960s as if that was a long era of time which had tremendous historic importance. Yes, there were things that were historically important there, but it was just 10 years. The 1970s, the 1970s music and the art scene and all of that, as if that were a huge era, an eon of time. No, in time, all of these decades, which now are so important to us, and we look on them as a world-shaking significance, all of that will be condensed into the first half of the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, and then eventually the 20th century. So we're too focused on small segments of time and the little changes that are taking place, which includes the idea, and the more important idea for our discussion now, that when something happens, we think of it as so cataclysmic. No, just have patience. The world changes over long periods of time. When there's something that happens in society and it seems to shake the very foundations of society, most of the time it's a blip, which with time will just seem to be a little tiny bump in the road of history. And so to get over reacting to everything that happens in time, because most of the things that happen in time, with time, are seen to be insignificant. And so we shouldn't be so focused on small intervals of time. Another problem that we face is that with the Me Too movement, which we don't hear so much about now, but just a year ago, that was a huge movement. That is the recognition that so many women had faced sexual assault and so forth. So the Me Too movement was that women were coming out and saying, I also have faced this, I also have faced it, I also have faced it, and recognizing how widespread it was and demanding action on the part of society. Well, with any movement, there's always a reaction as part of the way that physics works. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in social movements also, it's the basis of karma also. And it's the basis of the movement of history. When there's a movement, there's a reaction that rises and pushes back against it. And so with the Me Too movement, many men said, well, now I'm afraid to ask a woman out on a date. I'm afraid to tell a woman how pretty she is. I'm afraid to approach a woman thinking that she might be a willing partner for me or something. Well, good. All I can say is good. Good that you're afraid to approach women that way. Marriage and the coming together of men and women, that's not going to stop. Movements are not going to stop that. But it would be very healthy for society if women didn't think that women were just objects waiting for them to come and pursue them. That would be a very good and healthy thing for society if men were more hesitant to approach women whenever they wanted to. So again, it's not going to stop the coming together of men and women. Nothing is going to stop that as long as men and women have the nature that they have. But if men were slower to look on women as potential partners, sexual partners, that would be very beneficial for society. So get over it. It's a good thing. All of the aspirations of women are good. All of the aspirations are good. And yes, if we see excesses, that's natural. Just let it be. Let it be. Things will come back to a new level of balance in time. Allow people to express themselves, even if it's excessive at times, because they haven't been able to for so long. So now, coming back to Holy Mother, we've looked at Holy Mother's gentle side. So now let us look at another side, because yes, Holy Mother was brought up in old India, and she was immersed in old India, but she also showed a new way forward. And she was the beginning of a new womanhood for India and for the world. For one thing, Holy Mother was bold. It doesn't look like that at first, but she was extraordinarily bold when that boldness was called for. Swami Vivekananda said in fact, said that Holy Mother was Bagala, one of the terrible aspects of the 10 Mahavidyas, aspects of the Divine Mother, that she was Bagala in the guise of Saraswati, that is, the gentle goddess of wisdom, but she was Bagala, the terrible deity in the guise of Saraswati, that is, the tremendous strength and boldness and fierceness when that was necessary. So there was the incident that's well known when Harish, the devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, he had been driven mad by his wife and by tantric spells and things that had been cast on him, which had increased his lust. He was a very great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, but after his death, this happened to him. And so he went down to Jairambati and saw Holy Mother and started chasing after her. So Holy Mother ran around her cottage and he ran around. And so she ran 2 or 3 times around the cottage, but finally saw that he wasn't going to stop pursuing her and that he eventually would catch up to her. So then she turned and faced him and she took him and threw him on the ground. Imagine, Holy Mother. She took him, threw him on the ground, kneeled on his chest, grabbed him by the mouth and slapped so he couldn't move his face, and slapped him silly until other people could come and take him away. So that was Holy Mother also. There was a time in Calcutta when it was midnight, and she was resting in her room upstairs in Calcutta, and she heard in the street below that a man was beating his wife in the poor, the slums down below her building. And hearing the man beating his wife, she got up from bed, went, opened the veranda, and shouted at the man and said, "What will you do? Will you kill her?" And scolded him with such force that he backed off and he begged for forgiveness. And so she saved the woman from a severe beating. And so when she needed to, she could be bold and fierce. She was independent. She was highly independent, which again, you don't see at first when you read her. But then when you read within the context of her life, she was extraordinarily independent. Once Golap Ma asked her, "Mother, why is it that you are so independent? Sometimes you even go against what Sri Ramakrishna has told you to do. You go against him." And Holy Mother said, "Well, Golap, is it ever possible for one person to agree with another?" Meaning that it was possible even for her to agree with Sri Ramakrishna all of the time. Is it ever possible for one person to agree with another? So she defended her independence. She advocated for women's education at a time when that was not common. She herself had been denied, but she always pushed women forward for education. She wanted them to get learning. She would tell parents, "Don't be in a rush to marry your daughters. Let them get their full education. Don't be in a hurry to marry them off. If they get education, they will be a great good to society." She encouraged Sister Nivedita to school for Hindu girls. Um, and asked many parents to send their daughters to Nivedita's school at a time when high caste ladies would be reluctant to send their girls to a school run by a Western woman. But she encouraged it. She herself would break down social barriers. She welcomed Nivedita, Josephine MacLeod, Sarah Bull, these three Western women at a time when high caste people would shun Westerners as impure. And yet she welcomed them. She would sit next to Sister Nivedita. Things that at that time, now even in India, we can't imagine that. But at that time, that just wasn't done. It wasn't done. It was a time when orthodoxy was still dominant in society. And so she would eat with Sister Nivedita sitting next to her. She promoted the education and the advancement of women, and she was the she rejected the dress of widows in those days. And yes, that was through the instruction of Sri Ramakrishna, but she accepted his instruction. After Sri Ramakrishna passed away, she was doing as widows were expected to do. She was taking off her ornaments and she was going to take off the border of her cloth. So it was just a plain white cloth with no color to it. She was going to chop off her hair, all of that. And Sri Ramakrishna appeared to her and said, "What are you doing? Have I gone anywhere? It's just like going from one room to another. You don't need to do that. Ask Gauri, that is Gauri Ma, one of Sri Ramakrishna's women disciples, and she will explain it to you from the Tantras." And so then Holy Mother stopped removing the signs of marriage. And even though it was, she would go to her village in Jairambati where people would be scandalized by such behavior. And yet she set a new ideal for women in India. They didn't need to go through the process of widowhood, which was prevalent then. And so she advocated the education and the advancement of women and the freedom of women. And she was also the embodiment of all learning. And though it doesn't seem that way at first either, as I said, she seems like she's so simple she hardly could read and write. But Sister Nivedita said of her in different ways at different times that she had never seen a woman so intelligent who, whenever any idea was presented to her, which was far away from her world of experience, her very sheltered world of experience, so any idea from other lands or something that were presented to her that were outside of her field of experience, she would immediately penetrate to the heart of the idea and understand it and sympathize with it. When Sister Nivedita and I think Sister Christine, they put on a Christmas celebration for Holy Mother. The Holy Mother immediately saw the beauty and the meaning of the things that they were doing. When Sister Nivedita told her about the details of a Western marriage, she said, what a dharmic idea, what a dharmic idea. She immediately penetrated to the essence of any idea. When Holy Mother went to Bangalore, she gave initiation to a number of people, and the people didn't speak Bengali and she didn't speak Kannada, and yet the people understood her instructions. She was able to communicate without a common language. When Guru Das Maharaj, Swami Atulananda, the Dutch-American saint of the order, who had met Swami Vivekananda and studied under Swami Abhedananda, became very close to Swami Turiyananda, and then went to India several times and finally lived the last 40 years of his life in India. He was a disciple of Holy Mother. So when he went to Mother for initiation, when he came out, people asked him, Maharaj, how did it work? You don't know Bengali and she doesn't know English. And he simply smiled and said, does a child have any trouble understanding its mother? And so she had given him initiation and instruction without a common language. And so she was able to communicate in such an extraordinary way. She had great leadership ability as well, which she manifested. She became the leader of the movement after Sri Ramakrishna passed away. It took several years when the movement was in foment. After Sri Ramakrishna passed away, the monastic disciples were trying to figure out what to do. Swami Vivekananda was traveling around. Some others, like Swami Akhandananda, had gone to Tibet. And Holy Mother was in Kamarpukur for a couple of years without even basic food to eat or any of the other necessities of life. So for several years, things were in foment. But after that, she became the leader of the movement. Yes, Swami Vivekananda was the public face and the organizer of the movement. But Holy Mother was the force behind the movement. In fact, it was her prayers to Sri Ramakrishna that she herself said brought the order together as a community. She said she had gone, after Sri Ramakrishna passed away, she went to Gaya and Bodh Gaya. And in Bodh Gaya, she saw Buddhist monasteries and saw how the monks lived together and ate together, were provided food. And she said, This is what I want for my children. Why should they be going door to door begging their food without a place to sleep? Let them come and live in the same place and eat together and have a common life. I want this for my children. And so it's believed that and she herself believed it was the result of her prayers to Sri Ramakrishna for that brought the order together. She was the great support for Swami Vivekananda. When others, even after Swamiji had passed away, when others still doubted that Vivekananda was doing things in accord with Sri Ramakrishna's will, since Sri Ramakrishna's teaching seemed so different from what Swamiji had done. It was Holy Mother's support which held everything together. She supported Swamiji and his work and his emphasis on seva, and told people that no, it's Sri Ramakrishna himself who is getting these things done through my Noren, that is through Vivekananda. And it was her unwavering support of Swamiji which brought those who doubted back into the fold. There was a lot of among the monastic disciples, among the householder disciples, there was a lot of dissension about what Swami Vivekananda was doing, even after Swamiji passed away. So it was her that brought things together. It was her that told her disciple Swami Vimalananda, who was in Mayavati, that Swamiji was right to establish the Advaita Ashrama. He had written to Mother saying that I've been doing worship here of Sri Ramakrishna, and Swamiji was here a couple of years ago, and he told us that that shouldn't be done, but he didn't tell me to take down the altar, so I've continued with the worship. And she wrote to him and said, no, Narayan is right. Sri Ramakrishna was Advaita. He was all Advaita, non-dualism. His disciples are also all Advaita. And so therefore you practice what Narayan had taught at the Advaita Ashram. So in detail, she supported his work. And yet, even with Swamiji, when Holy Mother countered something he said, like once there was a servant who had stolen something, and Swamiji banned him from the monastery, threw him out. And so the servant went to Holy Mother and told Holy Mother that I have nothing, Mother. The only salary I have is what I get from the mutt. I have no other job. I can't feed my family. Then she sent him back to Belur Mutt with Swami Premananda. And when Swamiji saw Premananda bringing the servant that he had thrown out himself, Swamiji said, what kind of fool are you, Baburam? We threw him out and now you're bringing him back? What are you doing? And Baburam Maharaj said, Holy Mother sent him back. She said that he should continue working. And then Swamiji didn't say a word. There were several times when something like that happened, where Holy Mother countered something Swamiji had said, a particular thing, and Swamiji never said a single word once he heard, this is what Mother wants. Not a single word. So she had such authority in the order. So yes, she had patience and endurance, yes, but that we can learn from her. Learn from her that patience and endurance, because there's even a normal life is not possible without exercising great patience and endurance. Through impatience, just an impatient word, we can break apart a family. We can destroy a business. We can destroy a friendship just by a moment of impatience. And so learning patience and endurance is good. In the West, we have the idea that we can fix everything. Modern science and technology, and several centuries of the scientific pursuit and technological pursuit, has given us the belief that we can fix everything. I heard several years ago Bill Gates saying that, well, yes, in the software of the world, there's still a few bugs, but we're working those out. As if the world were such a simple thing that it's just a matter of programming. Got a few bugs in the world, but we'll fix those, and then the world will have no problems. Well, good luck. The world doesn't work that way. And so learning that at times our background attitude should be one of patience and perseverance. And yes, fix what can be fixed, but don't think that we can fix everything. There's some things that we just have to endure. Uh, So why did Holy Mother have to suffer so much, living in this small quarters at the Nahabat in Dakshineshwar, living such a restricted life? Well, she was setting an ideal, and she did it willingly. It was not that Sri Ramakrishna wasn't concerned about her health. He oftentimes advised her about her health, told her to get exercise, told her to get out. He had a devotee build a cottage for her, a separate cottage for her where she could live comfortably. But she herself chose to come back to the Nahabat so she could be closer to Sri Ramakrishna, because the cottage was outside of the garden, and she wanted to be as close as she could. So she came not for enjoyment of the world, not for her own enjoyment of the world. She came to set an ideal, and that's what she did. She uh, she showed, perhaps the greatest thing that she showed was that a woman can attain to the highest state of spirituality, the highest experience of spirituality, nirvikalpa samadhi, can express the highest spirituality in her life, and can attain to the highest level of spiritual authority. And that she did. So on one hand, she presented a human ideal, one that will take time for the world at large to learn. But when it learns it, it'll be of great benefit. And as Swami Shivananda said in what I quoted at the beginning, already her power is manifesting, and it's her power which is driving the women's movement, if we're to believe Swami Shivananda. Um, so she presented a human ideal. She also presented a spiritual ideal. The scriptures and holy texts of the different religions of the world were all written by and largely for men. But Holy Mother has presented a new ideal, and that will go on growing in its power and extent and its explication. That is, it's unwinding all of the things that are involved in the coming of the Holy Mother. So she presented a spiritual ideal, and she presented the ideal of the spiritual heart of the universe, the loving heart of the universe, the all compassionate heart of the universe. That at the heart of the universe, there is a loving mother's heart that cares for everyone, that weeps for the sufferings of others, that laughs with the joy of others, that shares in the joys and sorrows of all, identifies with the joys and sorrows of all, and who cares for all as the most loving of mothers. So, where is she now? She's on the altar of many, many homes and many temples around the world. It's extraordinary the extent to which this person whose life was so hidden, the extent to which her life is spread into the world. She also lives, more importantly, in the hearts of her devotees. She lives in the hearts of those who have come to know her, come to adore her, come to love her, come to worship her. She lives there in their hearts as well. And she lives as the Antaryamini, the inner controller, that is, the deity seated in the hearts of all, even those who have never heard her name. She lives within the hearts of all, and indeed she lives everywhere. I was reading the other day a beautiful passage, where she mentioned to a disciple, Asutosh Mitra, the brother of Swami Trigunatitanandaji. Came down from a high state and said, I see that Sri Ramakrishna is everywhere. I see him even in the eye of an ant. I see him in everything that is. Sri Ramakrishna has become everything. All of this is the Sri Ramakrishna. It's he alone that has become this. And that is true of the Holy Mother also. That as time goes on, people will see her as the immanent reality within everything in creation, just as Sri Ramakrishna is that. My guru at the time of initiation told me, never see any difference between Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. They're the same reality, two aspects of the same reality. So who will she be? I'll conclude now. I've gone way over time, but this wasn't a talk I wanted to cut short. So who will she be in time? How will she be seen in time? We're only seeing the very beginnings, and hardly even the beginnings. That if you look at parallels like Jesus and Buddha, that during the life of Jesus and Buddha, their disciples knew that their teachers were great, but they didn't know how great. They saw them as great teachers who could grant them liberation, who could grant them spiritual experience, who could lead them to the other shore. But that's really mostly what they saw. And then when their teachers, great teachers, told them to go out into the world and spread the message, they thought, yes, there's a message for the world too, so let us go and teach it. But did they have any idea what would come of Buddhist civilization, Christian civilization over the millennia? No, they undoubtedly didn't have an idea of what would come. And so with Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, as the centuries passed, and as we unwind that potential energy which is wound up within them, as the power which they have brought to earth begins to express itself, to expand itself, then we'll see it working its way through society, bringing great changes to society, bringing great changes to civilization, and great changes to religious life. And one of those changes will be the complete liberation of women, the complete liberation of women, so that they are fully equal, that they can go anywhere. They don't have to worry about men's designs on them if where they go, where they will be fully freed and able to attain greatness in any field of life that they seek. There will be no glass ceilings, and that they will be free as women. As women. Swami Vivekananda said that perhaps the next time I come, because he knew that he would have to come again. Sri Ramakrishna told him he would have to come again. He said, perhaps the next time when I come, I may choose to come as a woman, because the future age belongs to women. And it may be that I will choose to come in that form. So with that, I will close with the salutations to the Holy Mother and to her manifestation in everything and especially in all women. So let me give announcements, and then if there are any questions, there's really not time for questions, so I won't take questions. I go back on that. I've gone way over time, so I won't take questions now. Just briefly announcements and then a closing prayer. On this week, Tuesday, we will have the usual Bhagavad Gita class. But Thursday is Christmas Eve, and so there will be no gospel class this Thursday. And on Christmas Eve, we will have a service that begins at 7 o'clock. It will last about an hour. It will be broadcast over YouTube. We'll have Christmas music, we'll have reading, we'll have a short talk, and arati. It'll probably be less than an hour because since there's not a live audience, there's not the interaction we usually have. So anyway, we all are invited to that, not in person, but over YouTube. And then between Christmas and New Year's, we won't have our usual classes. We'll begin again after New Year's Day. But on New Year's Day, we will have a joint celebration of Holy Mother's birth and also Kalpataru Day, the day when Sri Ramakrishna revealed his spiritual nature to his devotees, January 1st, 1886. And so we will use that day to celebrate both Kalpataru Day and Holy Mother's birth anniversary. And so that will be done with the puja and then with the usual Kalpataru Day celebration, beginning at 10:30, going on till about 12. And at 12, devotees who wish can come, because on New Year's Day, Kalpataru Day, many people like to come here to the temple to make pranam, to offer flower, to get a little prasad. So after 12 o'clock, that will be allowed. The main time will be between 12 and 1. But those who come later in the day, I will be here and will gladly open the door to you if you want to come to make pranam. So those are the announcements for now. Oh, is it 7:30? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Christmas Eve will be at 7:30, not 7 o'clock. 7:30 till 8:30, or actually probably a little before that. So I'll give a closing chant. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Parapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. We make salutation again and again at the feet of the Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi and at the feet of the world teacher Sri Ramakrishna. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all.